I'm a researcher. And I'm going to share with you one of the most precious lessons that I learned as a researcher. I have two nephews, and I think having nephews is probably the next best thing to having a dog. But anyway, I have two nephews. And when they were about 5 and 2, I was in charge of babysitting them. And I didn't know how hard it was to actually bathe another human being. So I'm trying to fill this tub with hot water, and I'm actually filling it up. And then in the meantime, I just thought, I don't know how hot it should be. So then my big nephew, Jeremy, and then the little one, Nathan, they were just standing around, and I'm thinking, I need to measure this water. So I turned to Jeremy, the older one, 5, and I said, Jeremy, I need to measure this water. And then Nathan is like, oh. And then he has this little rubber ducky with him. And then I was like, yeah, I need to measure this water. Jeremy says, I know exactly what to do. He runs to the kitchen, and he brought back a tool that I can actually measure the water with. It was a tape measure. So I looked at him. I didn't want to disappoint him. So I took it from him, and then I said, okay, grab a pen and paper, Jeremy, because I'm going to measure the water. So I started measuring it. And then Jeremy is like, writing down all the numbers I'm giving him. And after measuring the length and depth and all those heights, I said, Jeremy, I'm not sure if this is actually giving me enough information that I need. And then he looked at me and he's like, what are you trying to get here? So I said, I need to know the temperature of the water. And then he looked so puzzled. He's like, temperature, how hot this is. And I thought that was a great teaching moment as an auntie. And I was like, you know what you need for measuring temperature? And then he looked at me, he looked at Nathan, and he's like, why don't you ask him? And I thought, what a brilliant idea. Yes, we can ask Nathan. And then I turned to Nathan, I said, Nathan, how hot is this water for you? And he looked at me, and he looked at his rubber ducky, and he threw that rubber ducky in the water. And it was one of those temperature-sensitive, high-tech rubber ducky I've never seen in my life. And it turned the color. And he looked at me with such confidence and says, good enough. Now that was one of the most precious lessons that I learned as a researcher. And the word measurement never meant the same after that day. So next day I went to work, and I teach coaching at the University of Toronto, and I have all these amazing people in my class, and one person put up his hand and he said, how do we measure this? And then the minute I actually heard the word measure, I was so tempted to pull out a tape measure or something. And then I actually looked at him and I said, measure what? What are you trying to measure here? And then he's like, well, we gotta know what we are doing is working. And I said, how would you know that? And he said, I don't know. And I said, what will tell you that your coaching is effective? And he thought about it for a minute, and he said, if I see some shift, okay, what kind of shift? And he said, I don't know, mindset shift. Cool. What does that look like? And then the more questioning that I did, he became a little bit defensive. I mean, I was not trying to offend him or anything. I was really curious. And he turned to me and he said, how do you know that your classes are effective? And I said, remember that I'm grading your paper. Get out of my office. Actually, this is what I told him. I said, you know what? That's a very good question. I need to know that my classes are effective. I need to know that my coaching is effective. I need you to know what good coaching looks like. So we made a deal. The deal was I'm going to spend my time actually reviewing his tapes. If he actually agrees to make tapes from his previous sessions, and after a couple classes, do another video, and then after a couple classes, do another video. So we agreed on 10 hours of video recorded tape that I am going to review with him. And I didn't know what I was getting into when I actually made that agreement with him. And then soon after, that one student became 10 students, 30 students, and it became a few hundred hours of watching videos and reviewing. Over some years, it actually became about over 2,000 hours of watching those videos. And what was fascinating is from the baseline video, that's what we call, before they learn anything, they make this video what they think coaching is. And then the whole idea of baseline video is so that when we actually complete the training, we can look back and laugh about it. And I tell them that too. Make a baseline and make it horrible, because then it's going to give you the illusion of learning progress. And then we laugh about it at the end of it. So then we made these tapes after tapes and after tapes. And then we actually started to see some patterns emerge, which was so fascinating. Pattern number one was how the clients talk, pattern of their narrative. So what was happening is pattern of people telling us something that happened from their past to future. There's a timeline of their narrative. Another pattern was pattern of their content. So something about something that they want to see more of and something that they want to see less of in their life. We call them positive content. Positive doesn't mean that happy things, but something that you want to see more of. And negative content that you want to see something less of. So when you actually put them together like that, timeline, past to future, content, from top to bottom, it's positive content and negative content. And we have 4 quadrants. We have that as a heuristic to see how people are progressing through their coach training. If we wanted to see if you do something different in your baseline, and then if you're doing something else in your, after about 6 months of training, sure enough, they were doing something different. And what was fascinating was this. When you look at the quadrant that looks like this side of it, I'm trying to see the way that you see it. It's a positive content of the future. So it's a positive future. We call it preferred future, quadrant number 1. Quadrant number 2 is your preferred past or resourceful past. Things that you really experienced in the past that you're like, I would love to have some more of that. Quadrant number 3, so we're going this way. Quadrant number 3, we call it negative content of the past, which is, I don't know, the troubled past. Some people call it trauma, mistakes, and all those things that happen. And then quadrant 4 is the future that you're fearful of. So fearful future or dreaded future. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. You see that? And then we could actually map the narrative of the client on the quadrant and then see what the coach does. And here's what we actually observed. I love this observation because coach does a lot of things, but one of the things that we noticed was that coaches were using words in a very different way. They were not using different words, but they're using ordinary words in different ways. So some patterns that we noticed in how coaches were using words. Number 1, they're more likely to preserve the client's language, but not any language, but language. Which one do you think they were preserving more of? The ones above the line, quadrant 1 and 2. When people are talking about preferred future and their resourceful past, coaches actually, they responded much more explicitly to that content. Throughout their training, they were getting better at it. They were getting really dialogically more intelligent as they were moving in the program. And then second pattern that we noticed was, as they were learning more about it, they were more likely to not only preserve the client language, but less likely to add their own content in there, which is fascinating, isn't it? Somehow, another pattern that we see emerging is somehow they were able to really use words in a way that really permeated all those 4 quadrants. So they were not ignoring the bottom quadrants, but they were leveraging it. They were using words to permeate. I'll give you one example. Somebody came in, a soldier, who just came back to his country, and he was describing his trauma that he's experienced. Trauma, quadrant 3, do you see that? And then this coach actually said, initially, to a very similar situation, he said something like this. Sounds really hard, tell me more. Tell me more. Exploring quadrant 3 is what he was doing in the beginning. After about 2 months of coach training, similar situation, similar client content, and the coach said, wow, sounds like a tough situation. And I thought, oh no, you're going there again. But then the ending was different. He said, how did you cope with that? Now it's a completely different orientation. When you ask about, tell me more about the quadrant 3 versus, sounds tough. How did you cope with that? All of a sudden, we're now exploring his resourceful past. And that pattern repeated tape after tape. And it was so fascinating because what I realized was using a heuristic like this, and now we call it dialogic orientation quadrant, just because it's such a simple map, and I thought it needs a serious name to it so that it's taken seriously. But really, it's a conversational map. And what I love about this conversational map is this. I mean, by the way, the word conversation actually used to mean something like this. In 1400s, when it first came up, the word conversation meant a place where you live. It's a very interesting word, isn't it? It's like a place where you inhabit. So that's what it actually initially meant. We don't use it that way anymore, but that's the original meaning of the word conversation. And when I see this map, I see where clients' narrative actually was dwelling. They have been dwelling in that quadrant for some time. And through conversation, in conversation, somehow that meaning gets co-constructed using words as a permeating medium. And I find that so fascinating. So here's one challenge that I actually give all my classes after that experience is this. Simply, that's actually their homework, first homework in their program, is tonight, and this is actually your homework, optional homework, I'm not checking, but go home and do something like this. Google coach demo tape, okay? Simply Google it, and whatever pops up, just see if you can actually use the map, the quadrant, and see if you can hear it from the client's narrative, and see what the coach does. And to me, that is one way of making that progress visible as a way of measuring what we are doing as effective or not effective. So that's my challenge to you, and I hope that you enjoyed it and do something with it. Thank you so much.